She walked into a university building carrying a loaded handgun and walked out having killed 3 people in front of colleagues who watched it happen. But long before that day, she had already taken a life and escaped consequences. Now she is serving life without parole inside a prison federal investigators described as one of the most sexually abusive facilities in the United States. A place so brutal that some believe execution would be a mercy compared to what happens behind its walls. This is not speculation. The United States Department of Justice documented years of systemic sexual violence inside this prison. Guards exploiting inmates, women assaulted in exchange for basic necessities, pregnancies resulting from rape by correctional officers, and those who tried to report it were punished, not protected. Solitary confinement, isolation, silence enforced through fear. This is where Amy Bishop lives today. A Harvard-educated neuroscientist, a published academic, a university professor, a woman once surrounded by intellect, prestige, and professional respect. She has now spent more than a decade inside Julia Tutweiler Prison for women, enduring conditions that go far beyond the sentence imposed by any judge. Her punishment began with a life sentence for a mass shooting during a faculty meeting. 3 colleagues killed, 3 more wounded. But that was not the first time violence followed her. In 1986, her 18-year-old brother was shot dead with a shotgun inside their family home. The death was ruled an accident. In 1993, a pipe bomb was mailed to a Harvard professor who had evaluated her poorly. No charges were filed. In 2002, a violent assault resulted in probation. Again and again, the system failed to intervene. What awaits her now is not just incarceration. It is prolonged psychological erosion, extreme heat, sexual intimidation, the complete erasure of identity. An existence where education means nothing and time stretches endlessly forward with no possibility of release. By the end of this video, you will understand why life inside a prison like this is considered by some to be worse than death row. You'll hear what federal investigators uncovered, and why this case forces uncomfortable questions about justice, punishment, and mental illness. Stay with me, because the person who committed those crimes may no longer exist at all. February 12, 2010 began as an unremarkable Friday in Huntsville, Alabama, a quiet college town built around research contracts and engineering labs. Amy Bishop was 44 years old, a biology professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, married, a mother of 4, holding a Harvard doctorate in neuroscience with published work and years of academic ambition behind her. On paper, her life reflected success, discipline, and intellect, yet to colleagues she felt distant, rigid, socially awkward, sometimes unsettling. That morning, she taught her anatomy class as scheduled. No warning signs, no emotional outbursts, no indication that the day would end in blood. At 4 in the afternoon, she walked into a routine faculty meeting on the 3rd floor of the Shelby Center. 12 professors gathered around a conference table discussing plans for a spring open house budget. Items, scheduling, nothing urgent, nothing controversial. Amy Bishop took her seat and remained unusually quiet. 45 minutes passed. Then, without a word, she stood up, reached into her purse, and removed a 9mm Ruger handgun. She raised it and began firing. Dr. Parole, the department chair, was shot and killed. Dr. Adrielle Johnson, an associate professor, was shot and killed. Dr. Maria Ragland Davis, a senior professor, was shot and killed. 3 others were wounded. Dr. Joseph Leahy was shot in the head. Stephanie Monticchiolo was struck. Dr. Luis Cruz Vera collapsed, bleeding. Professor Deborah Moriarty would have been the 7th victim, but when Bishop aimed at her and pulled the trigger, the gun jammed. In that moment, survivors rushed her, tackling her to the ground. The weapon was later found abandoned in a 2nd-floor bathroom. Amy Bishop was arrested minutes later outside the building, calm, detached in the back of the police cruiser. She repeated the same phrase: "It did not happen. There is no way it did happen," and investigators would soon uncover that. This violence did not emerge from nowhere. It was the culmination of a pattern that stretched back more than 2 decades. December 6, 1986, Braintree, Massachusetts. Amy Bishop was 20 years old when she shot her 18-year-old brother Seth inside their family home using a 12-gauge shotgun. She told police it was an accident, that she had been learning how to unload the weapon, but the evidence told a different story. Officers determined that at least 3 rounds had been fired, 1 into a bedroom wall, 1 directly into Seth's chest, 1 into the ceiling. As Bishop fled the house, witnesses later reported seeing her running down the street with the shotgun, attempting to enter a vehicle in what appeared to be a carjacking attempt. Officer Timothy Murphy confronted her at a nearby car dealership and placed her under arrest. Then, something extraordinary occurred before the booking process was completed. Amy Bishop was released. No charges were filed. The death was ruled accidental. The case file later vanished. Years afterward, investigators searching her bedroom found a newspaper clipping describing a teenager who had shot someone with a 12-gauge shotgun and attempted to steal a car from a dealership. The scenario mirrored her own actions with disturbing precision. The pattern continued. In December 1993, Dr. Paul Rosenberg, her supervisor at Harvard Medical School, received a package containing 2 pipe bombs. They failed to detonate only because the package was cut open. Bishop had recently resigned after receiving a poor evaluation. Her husband reportedly threatened to shoot, bomb, stab, or strangle Rosenberg. Federal investigators questioned both Amy Bishop and her husband. No charges were filed. The case quietly faded. In March 2002, Amy Bishop assaulted a woman in an IHOP parking lot, screaming, "I'm Dr. Amy Bishop," during a dispute involving a booster seat. Police intervened. She received probation. Only 3 incidents, 3 violent acts. 3 times the system declined to impose serious consequences. Each time the warning signs were documented. Each time they were dismissed. By September 2012, Amy Bishop stood in a Madison County courtroom facing capital murder charges. Initially, she entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. What happened next surprised many. The families of the victims petitioned against seeking the death penalty. Dr. Jacqueline Johnson, whose husband Adriel was killed, said execution would not restore what she lost. Dr. Joseph Leahy, who survived a gunshot wound to the head, said his survival changed his life and deepened his faith. Prosecutors offered a deal: plead guilty, accept life without parole, avoid execution. Amy Bishop accepted. At trial, Professor Deborah Moriarty testified. She described watching colleagues die. She described the moment the gun jammed. She recalled telling Bishop, "Stop, Amy, stop. I've helped you before. I will help you again." Bishop sat silently staring at the table, showing no visible emotion. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge Alan Mann imposed life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There would be no release, no future hearing, no chance of freedom. Amy Bishop showed no reaction. Massachusetts later reopened the investigation into Seth Bishop's death. A grand jury indicted her on first-degree murder, but prosecutors declined to proceed. She was already serving life without parole. The pipe bomb case was reviewed. Insufficient evidence. It remains officially unsolved. Amy Bishop entered prison at 47 years old, a Harvard scientist, a mother, a woman who had avoided accountability for decades. She was sent to Julia Tutweiler Prison for Women. Julia Tutweiler Prison for Women is located in Wetumpka, Alabama. It is the largest women's prison in the state, designed to house 417 inmates. It currently holds more than 900. The United States Department of Justice has formally identified it as one of the most sexually abusive correctional facilities in America. Amy Bishop arrived there carrying a life sentence, but what awaited her extended far beyond the punishment described in any courtroom. In January 2014, the Department of Justice released the findings of a multi-year investigation. Prison officials were found to have violated the 8th Amendment by failing to protect women from sexual abuse and harassment by correctional staff. The investigation began in 2012 after repeated complaints documented frequent severe sexual violence perpetrated by officers against inmates. Multiple women became pregnant as a result of rape. In 2010, one woman gave birth after being assaulted by a guard. In 2011, another pregnancy occurred following sexual abuse. Investigators acknowledged that inadequate reporting and intimidation meant there were likely more victims. The findings described a toxic environment. Officers forced women to engage in sexual acts in exchange for toilet paper, soap, and sanitary products. Male guards openly watched women shower and used the toilet. Sexual harassment was constant from 2009 to 2011. 6 correctional officers were convicted of criminal sexual abuse. Only one served more than 5 days in jail. Women who reported abuse were placed in segregation, deprived of phone calls, mail visitation, recreation, and work opportunities. Most eventually recanted their statements simply to escape isolation. The Department of Justice concluded that prison leadership had been aware of the abuse for more than 18 years and chose not to intervene. A 2007 survey found Tutweiler had the highest rate of sexual assault among women's prisons nationwide. Alabama entered a consent decree in 2015 requiring reforms, yet former inmates testified that abuse continued long after federal oversight began. This is where Amy Bishop was placed. This is where she remains. Her classification is medium security. She lives in an open dormitory, not a cell, rows of beds, no walls, no privacy, constant observation. She is now 59 years old. She has spent more than 12 years at Tutweiler. She will die there. Her husband told reporters they remain married for financial reasons. Their 4 children are adults. The family rarely visits. In April 2022, her son Seth Bishop Anderson was shot and killed in Huntsville at age 20, the same age her brother was when she killed him. Professor Moriarty later said, She wanted Bishop to know she forgave her. "I do not hate her," she said. "I hate what she did." That conversation will likely never occur. In 2015, Bishop filed a court document apologizing for the shootings for the first time, calling them a terrible crime. She also argued her attorneys were ineffective and her plea involuntary. Every appeal was denied. Dr. Joseph Leahy responded publicly saying Amy Bishop no longer existed in his world. Forensic psychologists note that individuals like Bishop often experience profound cognitive dissonance during long-term incarceration. The intellectual identity that once defined them erodes. Degrees, titles, and achievements become meaningless for highly educated inmates. This loss can produce a form of psychological death. The person survives the self they constructed disappears. Conditions at Tutweiler accelerate this erosion. Temperatures exceed 120 degrees without air conditioning. Food is frequently infested. Toiletries are rationed. Sexual intimidation remains a constant threat. Reporting abuse risks solitary confinement. Bishop was 47 when she entered. She is 59 now. Each day follows the same pattern. Wake in an open dormitory, navigate exposure, work menial jobs, eat inadequate meals, sleep without privacy. Repeat, there is no release, only time. Supporters argue Bishop suffers severe mental illness, organic brain damage, psychotic episodes. She claims not to remember the shooting. Critics counter that she planned it, deliberately carried the weapon, waited through a meeting, then opened fire. Her remorse surfaced only after legal options were exhausted. Her story exposes failures at every level. Early intervention, institutional accountability, and prison oversight. Amy Bishop was convicted on overwhelming evidence. There is no dispute about guilt, but the question remains whether what she now endures constitutes justice or something else entirely. A sentence that extends beyond loss of freedom into prolonged psychological annihilation. This is her forever. How mental illness collides with violence. How intelligence and professional status can delay accountability until damage becomes irreversible. How institutions fail to share information, fail to intervene, and fail to act. How conditions inside facilities like Julia Tutweiler extend punishment beyond anything a judge ever pronounced. Federal investigators documented sexual abuse, intimidation, neglect, and systemic cruelty. A toxic environment designed not for rehabilitation, but for endurance. The erasure is total. Academic titles lose meaning. Degrees become irrelevant. Time stretches forward without milestones, without purpose, without hope of release. So why do some argue that Amy Bishop's sentence is worse than death? Because death is an ending, a conclusion. What Bishop faces is continued existence inside one of the most abusive women's prisons in America. Each morning begins in an open dormitory where privacy does not exist. Personal boundaries dissolve. Male guards may observe the most vulnerable moments. Reporting abuse risks isolation. Solitary confinement replaces protection. Days are filled with meaningless labor. Meals are inadequate. Sleep comes surrounded by dozens of strangers. No silence. No safety. No escape. The routine repeats endlessly. With every passing year, she moves further from the identity she once built and closer to a number on a roster. The woman who lectured on neuroscience now endures temperatures exceeding 100 degrees without air conditioning. Basic necessities are withheld. Sexual abuse has been documented for nearly 2 decades. This is not temporary. This is permanent. And there are ghosts. Seth Bishop killed at 18. Dr. Parole, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Davis. Survivors carrying lifelong injuries. Her son Seth Bishop Anderson killed at 20. The same age as the brother she shot. These events do not fade. They accumulate. This is her forever. Silent, repetitive, psychological. There is no release, only time. Amy Bishop will die inside Julia Tutweiler Prison. No parole, no reversal. Every appeal denied. Professor Moriarty says she forgives her. Dr. Leahy said Bishop no longer existed in his world. So what do you think? Is this justice, or something more complex? Does living inside one of America's most abusive prisons constitute a fate worse than death? Share your thoughts below if the story challenged you. Press like and subscribe to Court of Secrets for more investigations into cases where justice is anything but simple. In the next episode, we examine other academic killers and what happens when intellect turns destructive. Until next time, this is Court of Secrets, reminding you that behind every headline lies a human story far more complicated than it first appears.